Right, so hello and welcome back to Books and Things, and welcome to another video. And today we're going to be talking about freelancing. So I went freelance in the middle of last year. I've been freelance for sort of coming up for 18 months come January, and I really like being freelance. So I thought it might be useful slash interesting if I make a video talking about being freelance, sort of what I do, what freelance editing involves, and also how being freelance and like a really big change in my life and routine, like how that's affected my reading, because I do think it has changed my reading in quite a few ways, which I kind of mentioned in passing a few times on my channel. So I have like a few general things I want to talk about, and then I also put out a call on like YouTube posts and Instagram for questions, so I've got some questions to answer about being freelance as well. I think some of the questions I was asked I probably will cover in like the general first half of this video, but I'll get on to some more specific questions later. So first off, let me explain like what I do in general. So I'm freelance, I'm self-employed, and there are three things that I do that are work in one way or another. So the first thing, the thing I spend most of my time doing, is freelance editing. So I used to be an in-house editor working for publishers, and now I am a freelance editor. Publishers send me work to do, I do work, I send it back to them. I'll talk about that more in a minute. The second thing, the other big thing that is part of my freelance career, is my writing. So I'm an author, I'm a historical novelist. My debut novel, The Secrets of Hartwood Hall, came out earlier this year. It looks like this. And my second novel, The Trouble with Mrs Montgomery Hurst, is coming out in summer 2024, which I'm really excited about. So, you know, writing and everything that accompanies that takes up a lot of my time. That's another part of my work. And then the third thing, which I like half count as part of my freelance work, is BookTube. BookTube is sort of like halfway between a hobby and work. I earn a bit of money from YouTube, mostly from ad revenue, occasionally from tips if people use the SuperThanks button, which is like the little heart button thing beneath the video on YouTube where people can give me an extra tip if they want. And I occasionally, very occasionally, do sponsored videos. So I earn a bit of money through BookTube that way, and also I don't know what impact my BookTube channel has on like book sales and my writing career, but it probably does have a bit of an impact. I'll maybe talk a bit more later about like why I count BookTube as freelance work, but I feel like basically counting BookTube as freelance work makes me feel like it's legitimate for me to spend my time doing it, rather than feeling like I have to be doing other work, if that makes sense. I'll probably mostly be talking about freelance editing in this video because that's what I spend most of my time doing, and that's probably the kind of freelance work that is most similar to other freelance work that people do, if that makes sense. So first off, let me explain to you what a freelance editor does. So there are in general like 4 editorial stages that happen when a book is being traditionally published. So the first thing is a structural edit, and a structural edit is an edit on like big picture things. So this plot line isn't working, this needs a new subplot, or you need to take this subplot out. The beginning is too slow, the ending is too slow, the pacing is wrong, the narrative progression isn't clear. So a structural edit is basically like all the big picture qualitative stuff. So when someone does a structural edit for an author, they will usually give the author what's called an editorial letter, which is probably like a, I don't know, 6 to 10 page letter saying here are the things in the book that are working really well, here are the things that are working slightly less well, here are the things that could be developed, maybe here's a chapter by chapter breakdown and some chapters that need more work than others, and that kind of thing. And that is kind of given to the author, sometimes with a marked up manuscript, sometimes not, depending on the level of structural work that's needed. And then the second stage of editing is what's called a line edit, and a line edit is again qualitative, but it's on a much like smaller scale. So it's this paragraph isn't working, maybe we need to make cuts here and here, would this character really say this, would this character really do this sentence is a bit too long, or this sentence isn't quite clear. When an editor does a line edit for an author, usually they will provide them with a shorter editorial letter outlining like bigger things or overarching things, but most of the work will be done on the manuscript itself in comments and in track changes. So once the line edit is finished, the book is kind of like approved, which means the publishers are happy with it from a qualitative perspective. And once the publishers are completely happy with the book goes to copy edit. And the point of a copy editor is to make sure everything in the book is correct. So the copy editor fixes punctuation and grammar and spelling mistakes, they fix timeline issues, they fix continuity and consistency issues, they check for historical accuracies and plausibility and logistics and little things like that which could be wrong. Copy edits are done in Microsoft Word in track changes, the idea being that the copy editor makes all the changes and leaves some queries for the author if necessary, and then the author goes through the copy edit, accepts everything they're happy with and resolves any queries they need to. And then once the copy edit has been done, that's the stage at which the book gets typeset, and once it has been typeset it goes out to a proofreader, and the proofreader is sort of like the last pair of eyes on the book, so they check, you know, a lot of the things that the copy editor has already checked in terms of spelling, punctuation, grammar, obvious errors, all of that stuff, but they also check like layout and line breaks and pagination, and they often check against the original manuscript to check that no text has gone missing in the typesetting process and all of that kind of stuff. When you do a proofread, that's done on the typeset pages, usually these days in Adobe using markup. When I started working in publishing, it was all done by hand still, but that over the pandemic has really shifted towards doing it on screen. So I do nearly all my proofreading on screen. So those are the main 4 stages of the editorial process, and as a freelance editor I do all of those stages. Structural edits and line edits are often done by an in-house editor working for the publisher, but they do also sometimes go out to freelance editors, either just one stage or both stages together if a publishing house is particularly busy, or if there is like a particular issue that needs looking at, or they want a particular editor's eyes on it, I suppose. But then copy edits and proofreads basically always go out to freelancers. I think there are a couple of publishing houses who do have internal in-house copy editors and proofreaders, but it's very rare. But in general, most books go out to one freelancer for copy edits and a different freelancer for proofreads, and that's because it's really good when someone is copy editing or proofreading something for them to come to it with completely fresh eyes. They know nothing about this book, so they can spot all the errors. So those are the main 4 things that I do as a freelancer. And interestingly, the balance between those 4 things has not really been what I was expecting. Like, I think I thought I would be mostly doing copy edits and proofreads, but actually I've done a pretty even split between all of them. I think partly because there are quite a lot of freelancers who only want to do copy edits and proofreads and don't want to do the kind of earlier stages of editing, whereas I really like all of the stages of editing, so I'm happy to kind of do all of them. I do love structural and line editing and doing all the bigger picture stuff, but I also really love copy editing because I just love repunctuating stuff and fact-checking historical detail. So fun. Anyway, I wanted to talk a bit about like the general pros and cons of going freelance, and specifically of like going freelance in terms of publishing and editing. In general though, I will say that there are not very many cons for me. Like, I really love being freelance. I have enjoyed my job so much more the last year and a half than like I ever have ever. I do think though that freelancing is like very suited to my temperament and to like the work I like to do. I feel like it isn't really suited for everyone, but personally I really love it. So general pros of going freelance. I think there are all the like general things you would expect about working for yourself rather than working for a company. You know, no office politics and all of that stuff. You're your own boss, you can make your own decisions. You always work from home, which for me is a pro. I like working from home. There are no distractions. I can just get on with my work. I also don't have like constant emails. Like, that was something I always found any job I've ever worked in-house, I would just have so many emails all the time, and actually like only receiving a few emails a day that I have to deal with is like generally so much less stressful. I would also say that like the main pro of going freelance in terms of editorial work for me is the work itself. If you are an editor working in-house in a publisher, editing is not the only thing you do, and it probably is about a third of what you do. You actually spend a lot of time doing publishing strategy, doing author care, doing organisation and project management, going to meetings and doing like so many other things, and the actual time you spend working on the words is not that great. Whereas as a freelance editor, all I do is work on the words, and I love that. Like, that's always been what I've really loved. I think there are a lot of editors who love the kind of like publishing strategy side of things, and who like looking for new voices and acquiring new authors, and all of that stuff, and I just want to work on the words. I just want to be like given a book that I can make better. Like, that's what I really love, and I love that as a freelance editor I get to do that. I also find freelancing much more focused. Like, in general, I am working working on one project at a time. Sometimes I do have 2 projects at a time when things overlap, but like in general, I'm working on one project at a time, and that is my main focus. And when that is done, I move on to a new project. And that's very, very satisfying and makes like everything much less stressful, I would say, as a way to work. I also find freelancing great for like being able to balance my time better. So I'm not full-time freelance editing. As I said, there are 2 other things I do with my working time, and being a freelance editor and working freelance gives me a lot more time to write, and also to do all of the other stuff that comes around writing that isn't just writing. You know, there's admin and emails and social media. As an author, there's a lot of time-consuming things for me to do along the way that are not just writing. And going freelance gives me a lot more time to write, but it also gives me a lot more flexibility around making time to write in the places when I need it. And it gives me a bit more time to do booktube as well, I would say, or at least it gives me like more flexibility to do booktube. So for example, like in general, it's better if you film in the daytime for light, which is very hard if you're working a regular hours job in the winter when there isn't much daylight. With the flexibility of freelance, I often film in the middle of the day and work freelance editing into the evening. So actually I've already started talking about my next pro, which is the flexibility. In the kind of freelance work I do, there are no set hours, there are no set days. I can work as and when I like. It makes it much easier to fit in like life admin, makes it much easier to fit in doing exercise, doing booktube. So I don't really have like a set routine, which is interesting because I think I thought when I went freelance that I would. Like I remember drawing out like a daily schedule for myself, and I just don't stick to that schedule at all. I have no set working hours and I really, really like it. What I do have is a daily to-do list and a spreadsheet where I record my hours. So I wake up sort of usually like 6:45, 7 o'clock, and then I write for usually 2 hours. Sometimes more, sometimes less, depending on what editorial freelance work I have on that day, that week. Then 3 or 4 times a week I do exercise for like half an hour after that. I have a knee injury and I have lots of like exercises that I need to do really regularly. After that, I normally do freelance work for a few hours, then I eat lunch. Sometimes I take a lunch break, sometimes I eat lunch at my desk while working, sometimes I read while having a lunch break. It depends on what I'm kind of in the middle of doing. And then sometimes I have a pause and do other work like writing admin or booktube filming or editing or anything like that. And then I do like another few hours of freelance editorial work. I usually break up freelance editorial work into like 2 chunks in the day, but it depends on what else I need to do. And it also depends on the kind of work I'm doing, because like if I'm doing a structural edit, I can sit at my desk and do that for like 6 hours, 8 hours straight. But if I'm doing a copy edit or a proofread, I can't sit there and do that for like 6 to 8 hours straight. It's a different kind of concentration and I just can't do it. Like usually after like 3 hours of copy editing, I need to have a longer pause. Like you just have to be so incredibly focused, like in a very specific way when you're copy editing and proofreading. So you kind of need to like take breaks between sessions of that, I suppose. And the same actually kind of applies to writing. Like I can write for 3 or 4 hours, maybe max, if I'm like writing a first draft, not more. Whereas if I'm doing like editing of my own writing, I can do that all day. Like I could do that for several days in a row, all day, every day, that's fine. But actually like writing a first draft, I can't maintain the momentum for like more than 3 or 4 hours, I would say. So it's interesting. I feel like when I went freelance, I thought I would probably do like 4 days freelance editing a week, 1 day fully writing, but I haven't done that at all. I've been much more flexible about it, which I just find works much better for the way I work, and also works much better because there are gaps between freelance jobs. Like sometimes I have 2 days between jobs and then I will spend that time writing, reading, doing booktube, all that stuff, and then have less time to do that when I'm doing freelance editing. Like I just find it's much easier to be much more flexible about it rather than trying to have like a strict routine. So those are some of the pros that I have found about being freelance, and then I also wanted to talk about some of the cons, like in general. As I have already said, I really, really love being freelance. Like for me, I think I am definitely made the right decision. Like I'm so pleased that I went freelance. But there are obviously like things you have to think about. Some of these are general cons, or some of these are cons which I actually quite like, but I don't know. Anyway, one of the main cons about going freelance is of course that it is less financially stable. You know, you don't have a set salary. I feel like how much this is a con depends quite a lot on what industry you work in that you're considering going freelance in. I was reading an article earlier this week in The Bookseller, which is the publishing industry magazine, and this was an article about the fact that lots of people who work in publishing are going freelance, and someone in this article pointed out that because in general salaries in publishing are quite low, the fact that freelancing is less financially stable isn't so much of a con as it would be in other industries, because in general, the publishing salaries are just not high enough for that to be something to keep you in in-house publishing. But I think if you work in a very, very different industry, then there might be a very different choice, I suppose. And I'm also very aware that, you know, I'm not freelance editing full time. I also have a career as a writer, so I'm also getting income from writing. And also my writing income is like on a very different schedule to my freelance income. And that probably makes it a slightly different calculation than if you are just going full-time freelance. Another kind of con related to that is that you have to be quite on like accounting, invoicing, doing your own taxes, all of that kind of stuff. And you have to be quite happy to like talk about money with the people you're doing work for. You know, if you're freelance, invoices are often paid late. You will spend lots of time chasing for invoices. And I feel like, as you know, a very British person who doesn't like talking about money, I've gone from like never talking about money in terms of work to, you know, every time I finish a project, I need to email and say, here are the hours that I have worked on this project, here is my hourly rate, and therefore here is how much money you owe me, please may I send you an invoice. So you have to like get used to a very different frame of mind when talking about money, and you also sometimes have to be like, this project took me a lot longer than expected because of X, Y, and Z things in the book, and therefore I'd like to charge you more. You know, you have to get used to talking about all of that stuff. Another con for some people is all the kind of like organization and admin. You know, you have to really like self-organization and self-motivation. You have to learn to manage your own time. You have to meet deadlines. You have to predict how long a job will take you with accuracy, and I like all that stuff. Like, that's fine for me. I am naturally organized and I love spreadsheets, and I have many, but I feel like for some people that would be more of a con. Another con, I suppose, is sort of like scheduling and workflow. So in general, I haven't really had problems like getting work and getting enough work because of how editorial freelancing works in publishing. As I said earlier, all books go out to a freelancer for copy edit and proofread, which means there is a lot of editorial work out there for freelancers in the publishing industry. However, I feel like workflow and getting work is probably more difficult in different areas of freelance, depending on like how much freelance work there is available in an industry. And one thing that is a problem in any kind of freelance work, I'm sure, is that sometimes schedules move. You know, sometimes you have a perfectly aligned schedule with like a project every 2 weeks or a project a week, depending on how long the project is, for like the next few months, and then one project is late and that causes chaos. Either you have to turn that project down if it's moved to a space where you can no longer do it, or you have to deal with it. And conversely, if you have a sudden gap in your schedule, then you know, that's a week when you're not getting paid, because if you're freelance, in general, you are paid by the project or by the hour. I would say that this is probably a slightly less big problem for me because I'm not full-time freelance editing, which means my work tends to be like less tightly scheduled, and if things move around, then I can do less or more writing that week or whatever. But it has sometimes like been difficult. You know, my October this year ended up being like much busier than I was expecting it to be in terms of freelance editorial work, and in another month I would have just like hardly done any booktube videos, hardly read anything. But it was Victober and I was like, I have to still do booktube, I have to still read a lot of things, and that just meant that October was like generally quite exhausting. Like, I was working like several 60-hour weeks in October, which is not ideal. Another con of being freelance is that you are working entirely on your own. You don't have a team. That is one thing I do miss about working in-house. Like, I've always had really lovely colleagues working in the publishing industry, and I do miss the colleagues that I had, and miss working closely with people. But in general, I don't find this too much of a problem. Like, I still feel like I get some of that team mentality over email, especially on certain projects, or if there's in-house editors I work for quite a lot. And in general, like, I'm fairly introverted. I don't really mind sitting on my desk all day working on my own and not leaving the house for 2 days in a row. And you know, I have lots of friends and family, and I have a writing group, and I have booktube, and I feel like I get community and social interaction from other places in my life. But I feel like if you're someone who doesn't, then that is worth thinking about very seriously before going freelance. Another con that is definitely a con of being freelance is that you have no line manager, you have no support system, you have no sick days, you have no compassionate leave. You are are your own boss, which is great in some ways, but also less good in some other ways. I think it can be difficult to be a kind boss to yourself. And, you know, like I said, there's no sick leave, there's no compassionate leave. If you take a day off work, that's a day you don't get paid for. And also, if you take a day off a project and the project is on a tight deadline, you have to make up that time. Like, you can't just hand in work late. And obviously you can have a conversation with whoever you're doing work for if you have some problem that means you're not going to be able to deliver a project on time. But that is a very different conversation to having a conversation with your line manager about something. It's just very, very different. And then the final, like, not exactly con, but the final thing I wanted to talk about in terms of freelancing is like how it's affected my reading. Because I do feel like it's affected my reading quite a lot, or at least it's taken me like a while to get into a new reading routine. The kind of line between work and relaxation is like a lot harder when you're freelance because you don't have set hours. You could be working all the time. And you know, the more you work, the more projects you take on, the more money you make. So it is more difficult to make time for relaxation. And I think especially because in going freelance, I have also sort of made two of my main hobbies into work. That is also tricky because the line between fun and work is just really diminished now that writing is part of my job, because I love writing. It's one of my favorite things to do. It is relaxing, but it is also quite hard work. And it is work. And like, I am working when I'm writing, which I feel like I have to convince myself of all the time. And BookTube is sort of work, as I've discussed already. Do I really count it as work? Sometimes yes, but I basically feel like I have really blurred the line between work and not work since I've gone freelance, which I think can be a bit of a problem. It does mean that reading is the main way I spend time on my own when I'm not working. Like, reading is the main thing I'm doing when I'm not working and I'm not like hanging out with people, which means in a way reading is like now all the more sacred, but also means reading is kind of like the first thing to go if I'm really busy. And I also find that like how much I read depends a lot on the kind of work I'm doing. Because if I spend all day like working on a structural edit or a line edit, then I can read very easily. Later that day, I can switch my brain off from whatever edit I was doing and I can just read the book I was reading. But if I have been copy editing all day or proofreading all day, it's very hard to pick up a book and just read it, because I can just feel myself copy editing and proofreading in my brain as I read. Like, I'll just be looking at a sentence and I'll be like, that'll be better with an end dash there instead, or that comma should be moved somewhere else, or is that definitely historically accurate? Maybe I should look that up. No, I'm not working. So I find that quite hard. And I definitely noticed that on weeks when I'm doing a proofread or a copy edit, I read a lot less. In general, audiobooks are a really good way to avoid this, because if I'm listening to an audiobook, I'm never in a proofreading or copy editing mindset. And classics are also quite a good way to avoid this, because in general, I just don't have that mindset when I'm reading a classic. If I'm reading a contemporary book, I can easily go into copy editing mode, but if I'm reading a classic, then I just never do. I just obviously view it as a different thing, it being old and more set in stone, maybe, I don't know. So I definitely noticed that my reading changes a lot depending on what project I'm currently working on. And I feel like this means that overall my reading has become like a lot more bunched up since I went freelance. Like, I feel like I still read the same amount overall, but where I previously would have read like 2 or 3 books a week in general, now I'll read like 1 book for 2 weeks, and then I'll read like 8 books in 2 weeks. Like, I feel like it's just much more up and down now. I also feel like I listen to a lot more audiobooks, but when I went and like looked at my stats and like went back over my reading for the last few years and how many books were audiobooks versus not, I haven't actually listened to more audiobooks in terms of quantity of books. However, I have been listening to a lot of very, very long Dickens books this year. So I think probably if I were to go and work out the hours, I think I probably do spend more hours listening to audiobooks than I used to. I also feel like it has taken me a little while to get into a better reading balance, but I feel like I have got there now. Like, I feel like basically for the first year of me being freelance, I felt like I wasn't reading as much as I wanted to be reading. And I feel like that isn't the case anymore and hasn't been for the last few months. I feel like I am getting into a better habit of reading the amount I want to read while being freelance. So I think I mentioned earlier that I have like a daily to-do list. where I have like the work I want to do every day. And I started putting like read for an hour on my daily to-do list a few days a week. And then I'm like, oh, it's a thing on my to-do list, I will do it and tick it off. I probably do mostly read in the evenings, but I do try and like make a bit of time for reading in the day. So I try and take a lunch break and read on my lunch break, though I don't always do that, but I try to. And I've also recently started implementing a tea book. So I have a book that lives like by the kettle, and while I am waiting for the kettle to boil, waiting for the tea to brew, I like read a bit of that book. So that tends to be like poetry or a short story collection, or like I read most of Sketches by Boz, like that. So a book with short chapters that I don't want to read really quickly. It just doesn't seem worth like trying to get back into work for just a few minutes while you're waiting for your tea to brew. I also think BookTube kind of helps me continue to read a lot, partly because, you know, watching BookTube and making BookTube videos always makes me excited about reading, but also I feel like I feel a bit of an obligation to have like several books that I've read in a month to talk about in a wrap-up, which I know isn't an actual obligation, that isn't actually there, and I feel like a lot of people would think that feeling that pressure or that obligation would be a bad thing, but for me it's a good thing because it means that I feel like I'm allowed to read because I feel like I need to because of BookTube, and that makes me feel like my relaxation is legitimate. Basically, I'm not very good at relaxing, so I have to like tell myself that my relaxation is necessary, and then I feel like it's okay. I'm going to move on to the questions because I feel like I've already been filming for a very long time. This is going to be a very long video. Right, I have quite a few questions and lots of stuff to say, so let me get straight into them. One question I had was, when did you realise you wanted to be an editor? So I think I probably wanted to work in like books and the publishing industry since I was maybe like 17, 18, and I always knew that I wanted to work like on the words in books and that I wanted editing to be part of my career. Because I really like reading, I really like writing, I really like thinking critically about the books that I read, so it kind of seemed like a natural place to go. I used to want to be a literary agent actually, and I did some literary agent work experience when I was a student, but then after uni I found it easier to get into kind of publishing houses more than literary agency, and so I ended up kind of going into that route. Someone else asked me, do you work for publishers or do you do most of your work for authors or agents before submission? How much control do you have over which projects you take on? So yes, I work almost exclusively for publishers. I have done a tiny bit of work for literary consultancies, and I would be happy to work for literary agents, but I haven't. In general, I just work for publishing companies. In general, I definitely have a preference for working for companies rather than individuals, partly just because of what I said earlier about like having to be upfront about money and stuff. Like I just find that those conversations are just much easier to have with a company. And also because I have worked as an in-house editor and I'm very used to dealing with freelancers as an in-house editor, I feel like I have a really clear idea of what is expected from me as a freelance editor working for publishers, whereas maybe I wouldn't have such a clear idea if I were working for individuals. In terms of how much control I have over the projects I take on, I have a lot of control in that, you know, I work for multiple publishers. How it usually works is that an in-house editor will email a freelancer and say, we have this project coming up, we need this kind of edit done on it, do you have availability? And you say yes or no. Usually they reach out like a few weeks to a few months before. I would say that I'm usually booked up like 2 or 3 months in advance, but sometimes not, just depending, and sometimes much more last minute things come up. So I have lots of control over the projects I take on, in that if I didn't want to work on something, I could just say I was busy. But also, you know, if you're a freelancer, it is hard to turn work down because that's turning money down. So, you know, I have control, but also I have to make sensible decisions in terms of my freelance career. Another question I had was, could you explain what exactly an editor does? I know the basics, but for example, how broad-reaching does your own knowledge on a topic need to be in order to catch errors when you're editing? Do you research a topic that you're editing in order to catch mistakes, or do you return a piece of writing to the author and say, this sounds inaccurate? So I think I've already like explained what an editor does in general at different stages, but I think it's a really good question about like how broad your own knowledge needs to be. This comes into play mostly at copy editing, because copy editing, as I've kind of said already, is like sort of the fact-checking stage. Copy editing is the stage where you check everything is correct. So this is the stage where it is kind of more important to know your stuff. I am almost exclusively a fiction editor. If I was doing non-fiction copy edits, I would probably need different kinds of knowledge. However, obviously fiction books also have subjects, and how knowledgeable you have to be about a subject depends quite a lot on the project and how specific the author's research is. As a copy editor, you probably don't really have the budget to spend like hours and hours and hours reading lots around a subject, but you do have time to do some fact checking, and often editors get to know which of their freelancers are really good at certain subjects. And I know from my days as an in-house editor that when you have a project and you're thinking about which freelancer to give it to, you do think quite carefully about who would be best suited to it. Sometimes that is in terms of a subject matter that you know the editor knows. Sometimes that is in terms of something like, oh, I know so-and-so is really good on difficult timelines, or I know so-and-so is really good at historical fact-checking, that kind of thing. So for example, me personally, I do a lot of line edits and copy edits on historical fiction set in 19th century Britain, because of course I do. Everyone who has ever worked with me in any capacity, freelance or in-house, knows that I really love the 19th century. So hopefully all the people I work for know that I'm a good person to turn to if you have a book set in 19th century Britain. I can spot historical inaccuracies and come up with solutions to fix them much more easily. I have a lot of like 19th century history books just around me to check. I know like where to look for the right knowledge. So in general, I do get given quite a lot of copy edits and line edits for 19th century stuff, which I love, of course. To be honest, if somebody asked me to copy edit a book set in like the Tudor period, I might just say no, because I might feel that I didn't have the right expertise for it. I don't know, I haven't been asked to copy edit a book set in the Tudor period, but in general, like 19th century Britain especially, but to be honest, 18th to 20th century Britain, I'm pretty good on. I'll be able to see what historical stuff is wrong, what needs checking, and so I do a lot of work on that kind of stuff because that's kind of my area, I guess. Somebody else asked about how I became a freelancer, what my background is, and how I market myself. So basically I worked in-house in the publishing industry for a number of years. I worked for just shy of 3 years in non-fiction in editorial, and then I worked for about 4 years in fiction and editorial for a couple of different publishers, and then I went freelance. And as an in-house editor and desk editor, I briefed a lot of freelancers, so I'm very used to working with me from the other side, which I think is really helpful because it means I knew what was expected of me, and I also knew a lot of people who were editorial freelancers who I could ask about things before I went freelance. The structural edits and line edits that I do as a freelancer are very similar to the structural and line edits that I used to do as an in-house editor. Copy edits and proofreads were not something I really did in-house, but I did check a lot of proofreads and copy edits as an in-house editor, so I kind of had a lot of experience of them as a thing, I suppose. So that really helped. My background working in publishing, I would say it's quite rare to become a freelance editor without having worked in-house for a number of years first. Then in terms of how I market myself, I don't really. As I said, I work for publishers, and I'm commissioned by editors at publishing houses rather than working for individuals. And in general, like freelance editing is a lot of word of mouth and reputation. So, you know, I left in-house publishing with a good reputation as a good in-house editor, and I have been building a reputation as a good freelance editor. And when I first went freelance, the work I was doing kind of came from people I had worked with in-house who knew me as an editor. And now I'm getting to the stage where it's sort of snowballed, and I'm doing work for people who have been recommended me, either by people who have worked with me in-house or people who have worked with me as a freelancer. And a lot of it is about your professional reputation, I guess. Another question I had was, how to start if you're in a different field and considering starting something new. And this, I think, probably varies a lot in different freelance areas. But to be honest, I don't know, and I don't have much advice for how you would transition into freelance editing from a different field, because so much of freelance editing is contacts and professional reputation. I have encountered a couple of freelancers who didn't used to work in-house, but the vast majority of editorial freelancers used to work in-house and have gone freelance with a network of editor contacts, in-house editor contacts already built. I think the kind of usual path to freelance editing tends to be several years in-house and then going freelance rather than coming to freelance editing on its own. Another question I had was from someone who was thinking of pursuing a career in editing and said, my biggest worry about pursuing editing is, what if I missed an edit or wasn't expert enough? I would say, like, as an editor, as you gain experience, you build up knowledge of your capabilities and you do build up confidence. And also, if you work as a freelance editor for companies and editors, you do get feedback. Like, you will get feedback from editors if they're pleased with your work, or you'll get feedback from authors who like your work through editors. Occasionally I go to Goodreads and look at like positive reviews of books that I've worked on, and that makes me happy too. I would say that, like, having been an editor for quite a while now, I feel very confident in the work that I do, and actually it's been really lovely to I have kind of been embarking on a freelance editing career at the same time as embarking on a writing career, because I have so much less confidence in my writing career, and I find my writing career like so much more scary. So it's been really nice to also be like establishing myself as a freelance editor at the same time, because I feel like I can really feel confident in my freelance editing abilities. And I feel like that's made me feel like much more positive about like my career more broadly over the last like couple of years. Another question I had was, what does doing well look like as a freelancer? Do you have any feeling of stability? I feel like there are two ways I kind of think about doing well. One is like being busy and being booked up, and I also have, you know, like financial targets of my own and that kind of thing, but also having been freelance for a year and a half, and in general having gone well so far, and in general I haven't had, you know, many gaps in work or anything like that. That makes me feel pretty confident going forwards. As I said earlier, because I also have my writing career, and that is kind of on a very different schedule and a very different timeline, that does help with a feeling of stability, I suppose. And that is obviously very different from other freelancing careers. But I would say that for me, doing well is being busy and being like booked up a few months in advance, so that I know, you know, okay, once I finish this project, I know my next like 2 or 3 projects. That always makes me feel positive. Another question I had was, are certain credentials or certifications required? I know in Canada it's better to be registered with Editors Canada. Not really. I would say that in the UK it's all about kind of experience and having a good professional reputation, and editors in the industry, the people who'll be giving you work, knowing that you are good at your job. There is in the UK something called the Chartered Institute of Editing and Proofreading. I'm not currently a member. I might become a member at some point in the future, but you know, when I was an in-house editor working with freelancers, we weren't like looking to check whether people were a member or anything like that. There aren't really any credentials you need except experience. I did do some courses. So there's something called the Publishing Training Centre, which does a lot of really great online courses. And before I went freelance, I did a few of them. Somebody else asked, what tools do you use to keep yourself organised? Planners or apps or anything like that? So I basically have 3 ways that I organise my time. So I have a planner. It's a Clever Fox planner. They sent me a review copy of one actually a while ago. I've nearly got to the end of it now, so I need to decide whether I want to buy a new one going forwards or look for a similar kind of planner. But I'll put a thing on the screen so you can see what my planner looks like. But basically I write myself a daily to-do list for the 5 days of the week, which basically usually consists of like, write for 2 hours, do work on this edit for 6 hours, do booktube work for 1 hour, read for 1 hour, exercise for half an hour. That'll be quite a normal like daily to-do list for me. Or sometimes like I will put life admin stuff on there too. And I always write out my like daily to-do lists for a week, like the end of the week before, so I'm kind of ready. So that's how I like organize my time on a daily basis. And then I also have 2 Excel spreadsheets on my computer. One of these is a work diary and an invoice tracker where I keep track of my like upcoming projects and the projects I've just finished, the details of a project, the start date, the end date, how much I'm expecting to charge for it, how many hours I've worked on it so far, and then once the project is done, how many hours I did for it in total, what I charged for it, what date I send the invoice. That spreadsheet is just for editorial freelance work. And then the other spreadsheet I have is for kind of like all of my work in general, and that's an hours tracker. So basically I keep track of how many hours I spend a week on a variety of things. So I have it broken down into freelance work, that is freelance work I'm getting paid for, freelance admin, so that's, you know, like replying to emails and sending invoices, and the freelance work that I'm not like paid for. And then I have columns for, you know, working on my own writing when I'm writing or editing or doing like direct writing, writing admin, replying to emails around writing, social media, all of that kind of stuff. I have a column for writing research, and then I have a column for booktube. And every day I time how many hours I spend on all these things and put it into that spreadsheet on a daily basis. I also keep a track in that spreadsheet of like how many holiday days I've taken to make sure that I am like taking the amount of holiday now that I'm freelance that I would have taken while I'm in-house. Obviously, when you're freelance, you don't get paid for holiday, but I still think it's important to try and take time off. And I also keep track of any weekend time I owe myself in lieu. When you're freelance, sometimes you will have to work evenings and weekends, but in general, if I work weekends to meet a particular deadline, or if I'm really busy or something like that, then I try and give myself time back in lieu. And those are the main ways that I stay organized. I don't have any other apps or anything like that. I mostly just use my Clever Fox planner and Excel spreadsheets. Another question I had was from someone who's about to start a new role as an editor and wanted feedback on how to manage reading and work. So I would say that if you are working as an editor, especially actually even more so if you're working as an editor in-house where you have to read submissions, then it is quite hard to balance reading for fun and work reading. If you love reading, you do have to try and find a way to make a separation and to make time for both. And often it can be like as simple as assigning different time for each kind of reading. So when I used to work in-house, my rule was always that on my commute into work, I would read a workbook, and on my commute home, I would read a book for fun. So that I at least had like a bit of reading a day that was reading stuff that wasn't for work. Also, because most of the reading you do for work as an editor tends to be on a screen, whether that is editing stuff on a computer screen or reading submissions on an e-reader, I therefore find it much more relaxing to read non-work books in paper form, which is why I don't read very much on my Kindle, except when it's classics. Classics feels different, so that's okay. But in general, I tend to read physical books or audiobooks much more than ebooks. I would say that audiobooks are in general a great way to balance work and reading if you're working as an editor, because one, when you're reading an audiobook, it's just a very different experience, so you don't think about editing the book in the way that you might with other books, but also you can listen to an audiobook at a time when you wouldn't be able to work or read stuff for work. So audiobooks are very helpful for giving you another way to read, I suppose. Then I had a couple of questions about like routine and work-life balance. Someone asked if I was able to stick to a schedule and how I was able to stay motivated, and someone else asked me if I adhere to strict working hours and resting time, or if I'm working around the clock now that I'm freelancing. And someone else asked if I felt bad when I pick up a book and started reading rather than doing more work. As I said, I basically have no set working hours, but I basically aim to do like at least 8 hours of work a day. I think on average I actually do more like 9.5 hours work a day, but that usually includes 2 hours of writing and often an hour of booktube. In general, I don't have any problems staying motivated. When you are a freelancer, and especially the kind of freelance editorial projects I do, usually I have a deadline, and the deadline is in like 10 days to 2 weeks time. So I kind of have to stay motivated. I have to meet the deadline. And especially when you work as an editorial freelancer and so much of your work and your career is based on professional reputation, you get work by being reliable. So if you don't meet your deadlines, you're not going to get work again. So, you know, I meet my deadlines and I keep people updated, and I find it very easy to stay motivated because I kind of know that it's important. And in general, I'm quite like an organised person who likes schedules, so that isn't so much of a problem for me. I would also say that it's easy to stay motivated because I genuinely really love my work. Like, I really love editing a lot. And also, you know, I take a lot of pride in my work. Having good editors makes a massive difference to writers, and I know this as an editor, but I also know it as a writer. So that means it's really easy to stay motivated because I think my job is important for books, and I love books. In terms of like whether I work around the clock or feel bad about reading, no, I'm not working around the clock. In general, I'm someone who's not great at relaxing, I would say. And I do also find that like the line between hobby and work is just much thinner because of writing, especially, and slightly because of booktube. As I've already mentioned, I definitely do end up working evenings and weekends sometimes, but when I do, I keep a track of that and I give myself time back in lieu. Or, you know, say I worked like Tuesday and Thursday evening, then I will finish early on a Friday or whatever, if I have time. I also try and take a bit of downtime if I have a few days between freelance editorial work. So actually I have had more like reading days this year where I've got like, oh, I have a day between 2 freelance editorial jobs, I'm going to try and read all day, which is really, really nice. So I definitely try and like force myself to have downtime, but in general, downtime is not something I'm excellent at. Another question I had was, how many hours a week do you spend editing, and how many books a year do you edit? Do you have more or less time for writing your own book? So it really varies week to week. Like I said, I'm freelance editing part-time. I'm not full-time freelance editing because I also spend a lot of time writing. I would say that a lot of it is project dependent. So some weeks, because of the project I'm doing, I am basically full-time freelance editing. You know, some weeks I'm spending 40 hours doing freelance editing, but a lot of weeks it's more like 20 to 25 hours. I probably also spend like probably nearly an hour a week doing like freelance admin, you know, emails, invoicing, accounting, that kind of stuff. And I usually spend probably like around 15 hours a week on writing work, the majority of which will be like actually writing, but some of which will be like writing admin and emails and that kind of stuff. Then I probably usually spend like 6 or 7 hours a week on booktube stuff. And then in terms of how many books I work on a year, sort of between 20 and 25. But sometimes I do multiple rounds of work on one book. If I'm doing like the structural and line edit, sometimes that happens and I might be spending like a lot more time on one project than another. I definitely have a lot more time to write. I must spend at least double the amount of time writing than I used to. Now that my books are being published, I do have more like writing admin stuff to do, but I do have a lot more time to write. Like, I have so much more time to write, which is the whole point in many ways of going freelance. So that has like definitely helped a lot. Like, I did NaNoWriMo in November, and I've done NaNoWriMo lots of times before, and it's always been quite a struggle to write 50,000 words in a month. Doing NaNoWriMo was so much easier this year than it's ever been when I've done it before. You know, being able to write for 2 or 3 hours a day as part of my like working day meant that writing 2,000 words a day was like fine. So that was nice. Yeah, I definitely have a lot of time to write now, which I'm very grateful for. Another question I had was, how has it affected your work-life balance, and what changes have you made in regards to the time you put aside for recreational reading? How has it affected your reading habits? Obviously, I've already spoken quite a bit in this video about how freelancing has affected my reading. In terms of how it's affected my work-life balance overall, I would say in general, really positively, but at the same time, the line between like work and life has become a lot thinner now, because of like writing now being work, but also it is like my favorite thing to do, and booktube, whether I count that as work or not, is a bit blurry. So I feel like in that sense my work-life balance feels a lot better. Like, I feel a lot less stressed about work and stuff, but the line between life and work is a lot more blurry now. Also, on the one hand, it's much easier to be much more flexible with my time, but also like if I get an email about a freelance job in the evening or when I'm on holiday, I do reply. When I am on holiday or if like taken time off, I usually put an out of office on, but I do still keep an eye on my email, because if someone emails me asking about a job that I really want to do, then I don't want to lose out on that job because I was on holiday. In that sense, there is less like fully off time, but at the same time I get a lot less emails in general, so I kind of don't mind that. On a kind of similar note, someone also asked how it's affected my reading habits having no regular commute, and I think this would have been a much like a bigger change to my life if it hadn't been for the pandemic and kind of changes in working from home, because while I've only been freelance for 1.5 years, I have been working from home at least part of the time for a lot longer than that. You know, it's been like nearly 4 years since I had a regular daily commute every day of the week. When COVID kind of first struck, I used to give myself like a fake commute where I would read for an hour in the morning before work and an hour after work. I don't really do that anymore, because I like to be much more flexible with my day, but I do tend to often read in the evenings after I finish work, I suppose. And also I do quite often end up with a reverse commute. If I'm doing something after work or seeing someone after work, then that is often in the centre of London, and then I have a commute into town at the time when lots of people are leaving town, and then I read on the train then. So I still end up doing quite a lot of train reading. Another question I had was, do you feel that freelancing leaves you with more or less energy to spend on making videos? I would say in general, freelancing gives me more time and energy to make videos, and also it gives me a lot more flexibility to make videos. So, you know, I can like take a 2-hour break from freelance editing in the middle of the day to film a video or edit a video and then return to freelance editing, which I find really helps with my like concentration if I can vary tasks, but also means I can like film while it's light and stuff like that. I say that I'm filming this right now in the dark because it was light when I started filming this video and I've been filming it for a very long time. I also feel like making videos and booktube, as I said, I sort of like half count as work in the way I think about it, which I think helps me feel like it's more legitimate for me to give more energy and time to it. But also, if I do have a couple of days between freelance jobs, then I fill that time doing writing and doing booktube stuff, and that makes me feel like I'm still being productive, because I do feel very strongly that I have to be productive all the time. And if I have like 2 days between freelance jobs, I feel like there would be a danger of me feeling very, very guilty about being quiet. But I don't feel guilty about being quiet because I spend lots of time doing writing and I spend lots of time doing booktube stuff. So, you know, I think in general it's kind of helped booktube, I hope. I feel like those are all the questions that I feel like I am equipped to answer. A couple of people did ask me like advice for other areas of freelance, and I feel like I just don't really have any advice to give. Obviously there are some like general things about being self-employed which are similar across the board, but I feel like freelance editing is quite specific. I will say that as a in-house editor, I worked with a lot of freelance editors and I learned a lot about what it was like to be a freelance editor from them. So I feel like that is a useful thing to think about if you are thinking about going freelance. Like, make sure you know what it would be like to be freelance in whatever field you're in, and if you work with any freelancers in the field you're in, then talk to them and find out from them what it is like to be a freelancer in that field, because I do feel like every field is very, very different. And anyway, I think that finally ends this ridiculously long video. I really didn't think I had that much to say about freelancing, but in general I have really positive things to say about being freelance. I really, really like it. I really enjoy the work so much, and I feel like it's given me a much better work-life balance and also a much like better work-work balance amongst the different kinds of work that I'm doing. I have a lot more time to write, which is nice, but I also enjoy the editorial work I do more. Do let me know down in the comments if you have any other questions and I'll try and answer them. And I think that's all for now. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll be back very soon with another bookish video.